Right, hello, welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 187 called Useful Idiots. Excuse the lack of tidying up shaving this week, and that I've been a little bit busy, but such is life. Um, this week has got some relevance as to how the Afghan peasants that were deported from Pakistan suddenly became reported as Afghan heroes in the press, as I showed in last week's episode, and why it was that the press were reporting intentional lies. Um, well, I'm going to try to explain it, put it that way, and that because it does have relevance to this week's office. Now, there is also something that, if people are familiar with a publication called The Grey Zone, I'll be referring to them in this episode, and a particular individual that I'll show directly, because there's further information on this specific subject that I don't need to regurgitate because they've already done it and that, but I'll make reference to it when it's required, and so you can find some additional material in terms of what I'm about to talk about. The thing about it is, though, and that is that what I am going to go into here, and that is something that you really do need to start comprehending in terms of how this network of useful idiocy is conducted. So, if we get into the first phase of the process. Right, so this week I'm talking about the Defence and Security Media Advisory Committee. That is the particular organisation in question, and as you might have suspected, they do not provide anything in terms of financials. However, I can say that there are at least 30 members in this committee that we can look at shortly, and I have to say at least 30 because there are some unusual areas around that as well. Now, whilst this specific office originates from 1912, the current incarnation has operated since 2015, and as with all things, they tend to, shall we say, evolve, not necessarily in the way that anybody would want them to. Now, in case you may not know about this, and that they issue things that are or have been known as what's called a D notice, or what they're now trying to rename as a DCMA notice, and this means an instruction to censorship under the guise of national security. So they're informing the media not to talk about things or how to talk about things, etc. You getting the relevance already? So take note of the bottom paragraph of this: overseas influence and using Ofcom as their useful idiots, and the method of doing so is via the Online Safety Act as the tool. Now, don't think for a moment this is the only one, because this organisation works together with useful idiots around the world, including a recent agreement with Singapore. And above all, remember that this Online Safety Act comes conveniently around the same time as the EU's Digital Services Act, miraculously happening all at the same time, all in conjunction. Well, actually, the two have had quite a bit of crossover in terms of the background production of it, shall we say. So it's EU and UK working together again, as usual. And it's very much all about the censorship regime. Now, when I do hear people talking about the censorship regime, especially after the lockstep around the world during the coronavirus, which is going to play quite a significant role within this episode. But the problem that I've come across is that I dare say there's not an awful lot of people that actually understand how that censorship regime is created and where the enforcement is coming from and things of this nature. So when you get people turning around, I mean, you get a few different perspectives on this and that. I mean, some people are turning around and saying, "Oh, actually, in that it's the US themselves that are dictating it through to the UK and EU." That's not true. You've got the rather dominant one of calling everything it's the Jews, they do it all, and that's not true either. It literally is just the UK and the EU doing it. But then, like I said, they are spreading it to various territories around the world as well. And in many ways, when you do start to put these things together logically and with the evidence that is there, so I mean, this is something that I'll be referencing at the back end of the video, and that with people with their, that you've got the meme about the conspiracy theory map guy. I will show that at the end of the episode. But if anybody's wondering why there is a lot of crying around Brexit in particular, it really isn't because of all of the bullshit excuses that they keep spewing out around, oh, well, the British economy would be doing so much better if we were part of the EU. And it's like, have you seen the state of the European market? And everybody would be working if we was together with the European Union. And it's like, again, have you seen the state of the unemployment everywhere? So, I mean, it's just complete and utter nonsense. And the simple fact of the matter is, they want their commie bloc back. That's all it boils down to. They want their EU SSSR. And with all of the German families sitting on top of it. That's all they're moaning about. So, this is the basis of the committee. Obviously, I'll be going into more details around it. Now, at this point, I want to refer you to an interview that was quite conveniently released literally just about 2 weeks ago, done by James Dellingpole, and he was speaking to a guy called Kit Clarenberg, and he was talking specifically about this office and how he's been working on research around them for around 10 years now. So there's really no need for me to go into a lot of the details that he's done. So what I'm doing here is just to say, understand that there is this interview for you to take a look at. I've also included 3 articles in the description, including the one that was published in the Grey Zone, which is the main one that he's talking about in that interview. And the reason why that's important is because he's presenting information around evidence provided via FOI requests in Australia. I'll refer to why that becomes relevant again later on as well. And it really does start to reveal the true nature of this censorship regime, done effectively in conjunction with the Ministry of Defence. What I can say is that we are looking at something that, as per usual, and that they're never satisfied with just sticking within their own areas of enforcement. They always have to try to spread that disease across as many territories as possible. And naturally, when you're talking about places that are like Australia and that being subjects to the Crown Estate, then it kind of makes sense that that's what's going on. Same with Canada and so forth. They have to make sure all the other useful idiots are playing ball in the same way as that all nations did during the coronavirus. So, just so you can be clear, if you ask this office anything in the UK, what you're going to get is something like this. And this was me communicating with the office just this week. And basically, it comes out with the typical situation and the problem that we have in this country at the moment with the way that government is set up, because they turn around and say, we're not government, despite the fact that they are paid by the taxpayers via the MOD, and they are doing precisely the government's dirty work, or at least whatever you want to call, like the deep state and all that type of stuff, and it's that area that they're doing the dirty work for. And they will not report a damn thing, and they have zero accountability. So they won't even produce their own financial records or anything like that. I mean, you could not get more unaccountable if you tried. So, like I said, this is actually a part of what people do call the deep state and the blob, the unaccountable civil service type. And that's precisely why they are placed to be the censorship regime, and very much an indication of why this is the kind of setup that needs to be removed from the system. Now, before I go any further, let me show you exactly why this committee, rather like it's rather like the media advisory panel that sits within Ofcom, which is why they're also using Ofcom as their useful idiots to go after all the social media sites. If anybody wants to understand that media advisory panel, because they've started obscuring that one as well, so you'd have to go back to my episode 42 to actually understand when they used to put it up on their website as to who was playing useful idiot within that group. They tend not to do that quite so much anymore because they don't like people knowing about it. But it certainly does give you an idea as to why this is a nest of snakes. So let's have a look and see exactly why there is that similarity within this committee. So here we get the cosy relationship between the state, the useful idiots within the state, and then the useful idiots in media, where those are outlined in red are literally all media representatives. And again, I'm going to refer to that sorry mate, Kit Clarenberg. I'll guarantee I'm not the only person that's made that mistake. Kit Clarenberg. Because obviously there's no other clearer evidence on this, but the claim is that this committee is not just about getting together to be instructed on any genuine national security matters, because it includes various jaunts and luxuries that are provided to the useful idiots in order to be able to keep them in line. And it's one of those situations of it's an exclusive club and you're not in it. Like I said, I'll let Kit explain how he's come across that particular area of evidence. Now, membership to this is absolutely 100% dependent on you towing the line and being a useful idiot. And then in order to bring these people to the table, to make them feel like that they're within the club, so to speak, the luxuries that they're provided is basically just the scraps off the table for being the good little doggies that they are. Effectively, bribes is what we used to call all this sort of stuff, but there you go. That's the way it works these days. Socialism. The main parts of this really, and that is the fact that this is a very good example as to why offices like this should not be allowed to be claiming no accountability at all. We can also notice the involvement of the FCDO together with the Home Office, because then that means that we're talking about an organisation that is not just pushing out diktats to the media on the basis of instruction from the MOD. So we're talking about including the various offices of the secret services, and that then brings in all their tentacles from around the world as well, I mean, including the likes of Australia, because that means you're linking together with all of the embassies, and then also those British Council locations where a lot of those secret services operate from. So there's a whole range of different scenarios and that as to how the media is being pushed in the kinds of directions that has become so apparent to most people that are paying attention anyway. I'll also point out that whilst this list claims to be full, the full member list, I've got a whole series of minutes. Now I understand that the Australian minutes have now suddenly disappeared because they don't like the mistake that they made. But I've got a whole range of the minutes for this UK office, and it does stipulate the names of the people that have been in attendance, and it's not always consistent with the people that are listed here. So despite the fact that there's apparently 30, it is obviously expanded out to more, and I dare say from a lot of the media organisations and that you'll have certain people at the top that, depending on where the holiday is going to be this time, will determine which useful idiot will go to be in attendance. Essentially it's a bit of like a game of musical chairs as to whoever's wheels need to be greased this time. I've added in the links all of the minutes, like I said, and those cover the periods from 2019 to 20, which is the benchmark period, going as many as I can through. I think there's maybe one or two missing within 2020 for obvious reasons, even though they were actually active at the time. But I am going to show you some of the information that can be gleaned from those minutes, and what are, generally speaking, quite a vague set of documents, but there are certain snippets that we can get out of it. So what I'll do is I'll start with minutes from 2023, because I want to see if there's anything that might back up my own suspicions around them being involved in changing that terminology in the media in terms of the Afghans that were deported from Pakistan, just the regular peasants, and then suddenly being renamed as heroes. Now, from the same minutes that will include this particular information, there was another little piece in that within it that I just couldn't pass by, because they've had to include the die crap at this particular point. And I do find it hilarious that you've got an organisation funded by the MOD, including the Secret Service and so forth, that they claim to have performed an anonymous survey of the people that they will, of course, that they've already vetted, and they want to pretend that they don't know the backgrounds of how retarded each one of the members are. But we are talking about a propaganda machine after all. Now, the killer paragraph really is this one, that the committee it's diverse, but at the same time it's male and pale. Right. God forbid that we're not being run by a bunch of black or brown lesbian foreigners. But don't worry, because the leftist cucks take their 30 pieces of silver as usual, and so then that means that qualifies as them being diverse, apparently. But do remember, this is 2023 under the fake Tories, and so it's obviously only got worse. And keep in mind that when you're being told that the fake Tories are now fake reform, and that somehow becoming fake reform, that makes them not fake anymore, by some miraculous reason, I would suggest that that's probably going to be equal amounts of bullshit when it comes down to things like this, especially those ones that are being shoved into this diverse quota that reform seem to have an obsession with these days. But anyway, slight digression. So keep in mind this is based on October of 2023, and I've put up 2 of 3 examples that they include relating to actions where the media did play useful idiot And it's the second one that I want to highlight. If I can get the bloody mouse down, there we go. And this refers to a leak of a large database of foreign nationals, where they then have to lie and claim that this included sensitive personal information of UK personnel, to which then the useful idiots in media have to play their useful idiot role. The timing of this leak and the reference to foreign nationals, that's the critical part, really. Now, the article that told the truth about them being just regular Afghani peasants being deported from Pakistan, that was published on 17th of November 2023. And then it was completely altered on the 1st of December 2023. So what we do have to understand here, and that is this the same instance? Now, it's possible that if you're getting a report on the 17th of October of 2023, that you could be looking towards a time lag of 1 month. That is slightly possible, because what we have to keep in mind here, and that is that the newspaper that reported the truth initially and then changed its tune was the Independent. Now, the Independent is not listed amongst these primary useful idiots. And it's also quite interesting to know that the Independent is owned by a Russian that apparently they don't mind, old Lord Lebedev, who also owns the Evening Standard. It's amazing, that, isn't it? That we don't like the Russians. We have to take every Russian's money off them. Oh, it's Lord Lebedev and that. Oh, we'll back off from that one. Okay. So little areas like that do make things a little bit more suspicious. But there's one further relevance, and that's apparently the deportations didn't actually start until the end of October. But the thing about that is that there's been similar deportations out of Pakistan, getting rid of these Afghan peasants, that go back to 2016. So what that means is that they do actually know in advance when this is going to happen and who is going to be deported. It's not like somebody sits back and goes, oh right, it's the end of October, it's that time, let's just round up whatever random Afghani peasant we can find. Well, no, they do actually have to create that database of who it is that they're going to be deporting. Hence the likelihood that we're talking about the same list of foreigners. Now, it does also tend to be that a number of elements that I'm pointing here, and that it could be said that it's a bit of a stretch to link these things together. But the commonality is the event itself and the fact that it was based on these foreign nationals. And so what I can't say is that this is absolute evidence of being the exact same instance. So I want to be absolutely clear about that. And it's not absolute evidence that this committee has influenced that change of narrative within the Independent. But it is a piece of information that can actually link into those series of events. That I can't really come across anything else that would fit this timeline, and considering understanding as well the fact that that's what this committee is actually all about doing. So I'm not going to turn around and say I've got the absolute proof of this, is what I'm saying. But it's enough for me to turn around and say there's questions to be asked there, and if this has actually been done as an direct instruction from this office. because there was no other paper that was reporting the Afghan peasants being deported from Pakistan. So everybody else was towing the line, except for the Independent, until they did toe the line. I mean, it does kind of go to the fact that when you have an organisation like this and that, they wouldn't be quite so stupid, I wouldn't imagine, as to literally have a statement put in the minutes saying, by the way, we told the newspapers to call those Afghan peasants being deported from Pakistan heroes. That's a bit of a stretch as well. So it's kind of my inference, shall we say, and because the evidence at least suggests this kind of action is effectively what they do. So in terms of the claims and the evidence that Kit Clarenberger provided relating to Australia, the November 2024 minutes included one particular paragraph of interest. And it does mention their intention to take this Australian visit. So, when you look at that particular paragraph, it does stipulate that there were Australian academics that instigated this visit and effectively looking towards bringing Australia a little bit further into line in terms of this censorship regime. And I don't know if this is exactly why the interest was sparked, but for me, I would raise questions about the two people that they name and claim to be academics, because one of them in particular is this Peter Grest, who's exactly the kind of academic you would expect, because this is a guy that was sentenced in Egypt in 2014 for having illegal meetings with the Muslim Brotherhood whilst he was working for Al Jazeera. And that's precisely what you could come to expect from the type of people that get our ideologues moving in their directions. So obviously this particular male and pale status was sufficiently brown and diverse, because when you're working with an organisation funded by Qatar, who also fund the likes then of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, then, you know, of course, those kind of relationships that he's got, I mean, I'm sure it's absolutely ridiculous then to have accused him to be working with the very people that make up the actual organisation that he's working for. I mean, oh dear. I mean, I suppose this level of retard does actually do the trick for that committee to say, oh yes, that's exactly the sort of person that we need to be talking to. So obviously, yes, they took the meeting with this fella and then went off merrily in that to ramp up the censorship regime in Australia off of the back of this Islamist useful idiot. Now, I can say that the woman that accompanied him is, again, the sort of person that you would expect. She's effectively a lawyer who's also involved in the social sciences. And it's like, oh, okay, Karen. So it's exactly what you would expect. And so this is the kind of workings that we're seeing that take place within this committee. And so it's not too much of a stretch to understand that when you have a whole bunch of Afghanis being sent over to the UK, and they want to be able to cover it up. It is not such an outrageous claim on my part to say that the reason why that article was suddenly changed and the kind of narrative that followed afterwards, and then the resulting rapes and so forth from 16-year-olds who are clearly not Afghan heroes. There's things that we can put together to understand the consequences of when you allow organisations like this to operate in the way that they do, at least in its current format. But when I say its current format, and because I'm not going to go over all of the stuff that Kit fella has produced himself, I want to go back to the relevance of how a lot of all of this sort of stuff came to be in the wider public notice anyway. And let's go back to this coronavirus period, because this office and this office personnel in particular does have relevance to that particular time frame. And so the Director General of this committee was requested to give evidence to the COVID whitewash, which was conducted by that Heather Hallett, who, if you'll recall, and that did actually respond to me before her farce of an inquiry got underway, and she responded to me to say how the burden of proof would play no part in her so-called inquiry, which let me, and then I let you know, that straight away up front we knew that this was going to be an utter joke, which it did end up being. Now, what you can see from the statement, the witness statement, that was made by this Paul Wyatt, and like I say, the guy that runs this coercive committee for censorship, they set things up to fail by asking him to cover 9 themes in his statement, none of which go anywhere near the areas that we would have had the most interest in, namely things like the 77th Brigade and how the MOD did assist in the censorship regime during that particular period. Little pieces I will point out later on, though, that do give a little bit of an indication. It was also based on a response from this Paul Wyatt being made as a statement and not being conducted as a thorough Q&A, which you would have expected in any kind of competent inquiry. But, you know, preaching to the converted here, I suppose. But we do get some indication, because here we get information about a defence instruction notice, which fundamentally is basically the same thing as a D notice or a DSMA notice, and you can see the evidence for that here. Again, all links in the description for this stuff, because everything has to be about citation, doesn't it? The fact that they put China as the lead advisory and then the WHO does rather indicate a big part of the problem that we were being subject to. Now, there are some timeline problems as well, especially in regard to a heavy focus on this particular statement that he made, that are based around the testing and tracing. So I find this evidence of claiming a request to deliver a prototype mobile testing unit a little bit interesting, because it stipulates the requested timing of this request being the Easter weekend of 2020. Okay, so the reason why that's interesting then is that you've got you've had the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, which started on March the 23rd. So we've got the March the 23rd there. Then you've got Easter Day, which is here, April the 12th. So then that's less than 3 weeks. In another 3 days then, apparently they had researched the world and delivered a prototype to London. So less than a month from that initial claim of 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now, what I can say at that point in time, because I do still have all of the records, and I will show some evidence of this later on, I produced a report on April the 16th that stipulated precisely how all of the numbers around this coronavirus had just drifted into complete and utter farce. So, for example, in terms of the UK, on April the 10th, they had reported a total claimed deaths of 1,861. But by April the 16th, this had been revised down to 861. The claimed cases had gone from 13,025 down to 4,617. So exactly what it was that they were supposed to be responding to at that point can only be considered to have been something that is based on pre-planning, not responding to events. If they had genuinely bothered to look around the world, and especially if they're focusing so much on China, you know, their go-to source, along with the WHO that didn't know jack shit, China were reporting 46 cases at that point and 0 deaths. A lot of this timeline again dictates that we're looking at things that were pre-planned bullshit. But obviously the inquiry, the Great Inquiry, weren't capable of deducing these basic facts, because facts were never the intent. Now, if we add to this, during March of 2020, they were already being requested to provide lab facilities for the tested, you know, for the testing situation, on the basis of an expected escalation in demand, for which there were absolutely no numbers that backed that up. Here's another part that I personally do remember, because it mentions Manston, which is just down the road from me, whereby they had 900 military staff to test 8,000 lorry drivers 130,000 times, apparently. So the equivalent of over 16 tests per driver. That wasn't a money-making machine, was it? And it was also something of a retarded and very desperate attempt to try to get those positive numbers up, wasn't it? We will test you until we get the result we want. A bit like EU voting. Now, when it came down to things like contact tracing, there's 2 key points within this evidence. that he gave within his statement, which are again the timing of this starting in March of 2020, their involvement in contact tracing. And then the MOD using their Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. That it has started to include behavioural science, more commonly known as propaganda. So that's already stuff that is being put in play before this 2 weeks to flatten the curve have ended. This is all rather cockeyed, isn't it? So you've got a propaganda unit that is obviously incapable of checking their own dates to make sure that things don't look as stupid as they clearly do. And then you've got a so-called inquiry that obviously also doesn't understand. Those dates don't make sense. Now, I had stated that I have the records still and the reports that I produced during the coronavirus period. And just so that you can understand that this is factual. Now, you're probably not going to be able to see the finer details here. And this was at a stage when the charts that I was producing at the time covered the whole world rather than separating them by continents and so forth. That was something that I did a bit later on from this. And this specific report was produced on April the 16th of 2020. And so we're talking about something that is showing the data from when I started taking the data on March the 15th. So I was in advance of this lockdown bullshit. And so I've got at least 1 month's data to look at across the world. And you can see a couple of statements that I made at that particular point in time that are above me there that I included to go along with the data side of things. And already I'm bringing attention to a huge bullshit alert, because at that point 3 countries had already turned around and gone, nah, there's nothing going on here. And then the numbers themselves and that were just really not making sense at all, because I then also made the statement that the daily inconsistency now in the rise and fall has become pretty fucking stupid. It's as if the algorithm has just said, fuck it, whatever, dude. The data was really showing that everything that was being pushed on the public was just complete and utter garbage. If I could go back and add one thing at all, it would have been... No, I could well have done it in the message that I used to post accompanying this, but I can't remember. And obviously I got banned from the site that I was reporting this on at that point. The thing about it was it was rather convenient at that point to go, well, oh, so you've got this world pandemic, claimed pandemic, that is rather desperately trying to focus on the nations where it's politically convenient, especially the US during an election year. Because everywhere else doesn't really seem to be following the same pattern here. And then you've obviously got the useful idiots of the UK and so forth, and that I mean, even the UK at that point, and that started to just go, this obviously the propaganda was still pushing it, but the data was just going, this is bollocks. It was an absolute utter scam, and the UK did play a big role in this, obviously including that useful idiot office, this committee that is going to tell the media to ramp up the fear, which they obviously did in conjunction with the likes of Sage. They do actually mention that guy does mention in his statement about having some work done with Sage. But I just found it more useful to provide the direct evidence to say that they had their own behavioural science propaganda merchants that were being involved in this. Now, it might seem that I've sort of diverted off track a little bit in terms of concentrating on that statement and then this kind of information that I'd produced myself 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever it was. But the fact is that these are the kind of actions that were taking place during the coronavirus, and that showed everybody the true state of this propaganda machine that really ramped up from that period. It did show us the ideology and the direct actions against the public that really did take the mask. It was a take the mask off moment, as they were telling you to put your mask on. And how the media was most definitely being their useful idiot bitch in all of this. So these are the areas that I can show in terms of the work that I did myself. And so if you want to understand a bit more as to the level of corruption behind this particular office, then like I say, please do check that work of Kit Clarenberg, where I can say that that Grey Zone article in particular does give the evidence and the links to the documents that he got via FOI and via the Australian offices, which they've had to store because now a lot of that information and minutes and so forth from Australia have now conveniently been deleted. Will some of this information, now that I'm putting it out, be deleted as well? Entirely possible, but we've got it here now as here for prosperity. It is prosperity, isn't it? Not prosperity. Prosperity, yeah. But the thing of it is, and the point that I want to make is that in terms of a look at this office, within the audit process, we can see quite clearly that we're dealing with something that is just completely taxpayer funded but completely unaccountable. No reporting of any description whatsoever. Highly influential in terms of pushing the media. Direct statement that says that they're now also using that media group that is involved within Ofcom as well to start pushing their ideology around the world, which has got relevance to obviously at the wider platforms. Because I understand that there had been a number of attempts, and they did actually have Google on this committee at one point, and I think they remained on the committee for about 1 year and then walked away. All of the other social media platforms, the big platforms out in the US, have constantly refused to be a part of this committee. But you can't be complacent around that, because, like I say, that media advisory panel that is part of Ofcom, that this committee is now also using to do the dirty work. A lot of those platforms are involved in that. So they're all those little tentacles always find a way. And Twitter used to be a part of that media advisory panel. I don't think they are, in terms of being called X, I don't think they are anymore. But, you know, there's a reason why a lot of the platforms are just playing useful idiot. So as far as the update of the financials are concerned, there's nothing to add, because they haven't reported any numbers, because God forbid any accountability to the use of our money. And then in terms of the policies, absolutely, of course, I would abolish this. I would abolish this committee. Now, are there occasionally legitimate cases for national security matters to be involved and say, the media needs to back off from certain stories. I dare say sometimes there are possibly legitimate cases to be made insofar as that is concerned. But when you've got an organisation that has set themselves up to be purely ideological and purely about deceiving the public, that can no longer stand. And so any kind of activity that does need the media to be instructed to any level at all, I mean, first and foremost, there should never be any instruction whatsoever that is getting involved in other countries around the world. They should not be making diktats to other countries. And so, like I say, when I saw that this agreement had been made with Singapore, I've not put it in as evidence in here, but I'm sure you can find it. When they're having agreements done with Singapore, and I just think, well, there's something very, very wrong there. And that kind of involvement around the world should never be allowed. There should certainly never be anything conducted where it is being performed in order to protect the Islamolunacy side of the equation. So, like I said, I mean, if you've got somebody that has basically been working in conjunction with the Muslim Brotherhood, I don't care if he is male and pale, you don't invite him in the office. That's not a difficult thing to understand, or it shouldn't be. So if you are going to have something that is legitimate, then it is something that should be done directly at the top, from the top of the MOD, not having some obscure office deciding by themselves what they think should be done. Somebody that is accountable to do it, and they better have a bloody good reason as well. And the media, their responsibility is to question them as to whether it is a legitimate request. So because of the stuff that they have been obviously involved with, which again I have to go back to the fact that a great deal of deception on the public going back to the coronavirus period. Before the closure of this office, and that I would have to send somebody in to every single one of these people involved in that and conduct a thorough investigation, because there are people here that need to be held to account. I would suggest that this committee, in its current format, this is the national security threat. For that reason alone, this office would be abolished. So, as a little bit of an ending statement this week, I mean, I hope you understand what it is that I've been trying to get across in terms of why this office is unworthy. But I also then have to end up this week with a bit of a statement around this, because this is something that is being very heavily propagandized at the moment. And suffice to say that anybody that is falling for this Q-Anon 2.0 bollocks, then you clearly will have learnt nothing over the last 10 years, because it's been 10 years since Q-Anon really sort of kicked off the first time. Now, I'm sure that there's some of you out there that might think that, well, hang on a minute. If you're suggesting that this particular thing is a conspiracy theory, then what have you just done in terms of that Afghan peasants, and do all of these things link together and that, and have I got the strings out for it? Well, if you do think that, you might have missed my statement saying that it's not actual evidence, but the timeline of events do tend to sort of go together. I'm not making a direct statement of fact. I'm giving an indication. What this particular load of crap does literally is in the realms of conspiracy theory map guy. It is in the nutter territory, where I can say a couple of things about it really. Is that first and foremost, this came completely out of nowhere. And when something comes out of nowhere and then suddenly appears everywhere, then you know that there's some sort of backing behind it. Any kind of organic growth of somebody that is presenting information that people might take interest in doesn't happen in this way. The next thing is that you've got a very distinct aim of creating false narratives, which will essentially result in the same level of disillusionment that happened with the first version of this QAnon crap. And this is very much focused on destroying any kind of relationship between the US and the UK. Not that it needs that much at the moment in terms of the people sitting atop the two countries. Now, it does occur to me, and that is that who would actually want those relationships to break down? And I suppose it basically comes back to the same kind of retards that are pushing the censorship and the propaganda, and those people that want to see the UK join the wider EU, SSR cuckolding organisation again. I mean, the one part that really did, or rather the two parts that really did, I'll just focus on the one actually, that really did get my goat with this, because I've kept an eye on it a little bit. But this particular woman, she turned around and she went on all manner of mental gymnastics to claim that taking Maduro out of Venezuela was an action to cause the failure of the offshore banking systems across the UK overseas territories, the likes of the Cayman Islands and so forth. I mean, how the fuck she come to that one is beyond me. And the fact that, because I do actually know somebody out in the Caymans and I have spoken to them about, we've seen this all before now, because we've seen the stuff like with the Panama Papers and what have you, and these absolute screaming idiots that want to, like I say, get those strings out and tie everything together. And they were made to look so completely bloody stupid the last time they tried this. And I do refer to a particular interview that was conducted on Newsnight. I don't think I might be able to find it, but I'll let you do it. But there was a Newsnight interview with oh god, what was her name? I can't remember what her name is now. She's the Scottish woman that was on Newsnight, and she tried to pull all of the usual bullshit theories out, and she was interviewing Anthony Travers, and Anthony Travers is the guy that I've had backwards and forwards with before, and Anthony absolutely destroyed her. I mean, it was embarrassing how badly he destroyed her. Because it was literally a case of, do you know anything about the banking system? Do you know anything about anything? And this woman was just a complete babbling idiot in front of him. And it's a very similar situation. Now, I did see that she did an interview with another guy that's come, a Vivek Ramaswamy 2.0, that's suddenly come out of nowhere using some name called Crypto Rich. Right. And they had a conversation with Nick Hudson. Absolutely embarrassing. Historically illiterate. narrative-wise, completely retarded, because you've got Mr. fucking Vivek 2.0 saying how he likes Jeremy Corbyn, who's a great supporter of fucking Maduro from Venezuela, and then you've got this silly bint turning around and saying how taking Maduro has been a really great thing because it's going to attack all the offshore. Make up your mind. You can't even put propaganda together properly. Utter bollocks. So do be careful of that one. And I also did notice that one of the main voices behind Q-Anon, the original version, has also suddenly started promoting this version. So do be careful with that, because it is complete and utter bollocks from somebody that knows nothing. On a slightly lighter note, I did mention last week that I'd ordered a book, so the first reading that I would be doing this year, and last week and that it hadn't actually arrived, so it did arrive and I have read it. It's Lawfare, a Practical Guide by Henry Martin. Give it another little promotion there. I've had a little bit of a backwards and forwards with the young author as well. It is worth reading, and I know I certainly know myself, and that it's not an easy thing to write a book. So you know, good on him for having done that. But there are certain areas within it that I think are slightly missing, and the sort of the discussions of the UK and the EU, the UK and the US, maybe separate those two out. But you know, anybody can provide a criticism about this sort of stuff, and that, you know, if you've got a critique, do it your fucking self. Which is something that I have actually been trying to do, and there's a teaser in the links to the first 50 pages of what I've been writing, which already needs to be changed. So what may seem like a criticism actually isn't. For a lad of his age, well done, mate. And I do recommend it. So give that a bit of a look through. And he is also open to answering anybody's questions if you link up to him on X, as it's called these days, before it gets banned. Because there is a very strong possibility that I think this X is going to actually end up being removed, on account of the fact that it was a very, very weird situation. And I noticed that there was there's another guy that lives fairly close by, and that goes by the name of Andy the Gabby Cabby, where he'd asked this Grok, this AI system that they have on X, if it has the capability to be able to take pictures of people and then alter them so that they are then nude or in bikinis or compromised or anything like that. To which the response from Grok was, no, I don't have that capability. Oh, well, yes you do. Yes you do. We'd literally seen a whole bunch of examples of people using and abusing it in actually amusing ways. In particular, there was the one from Dan Tubbs from the Lotus Eaters, where you've got a picture of Dan Tubbs suddenly with a pair of boobs. So yes, they had done that, and it was so obvious that that was going to be a flagrant violation, that all of these Online Safety Acts, Digital Service Act, and etc., etc., of course it was going to fall afoul of that. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you intentionally enable your software to do something like that, your algorithm to do something like that, if it wasn't to intentionally spark that kind of a response. Very odd. Very, very odd. But then, as we keep saying, can we trust Elon Musk in all of this as well? Probably not. But like I say, there's it's always the case that is everything a conspiracy theory? Is everything propaganda? Is everything a problem? I mean, we can always find these things, and it's a matter of, well, which parts matter, and how much time do we need to waste on what is quite frankly nonsense. I'm kind of hoping that these videos that I do in terms of showing what the offices are within government give a bit of a practical side as to what it is that we've actually got within the system. So when I can make these kinds of criticisms, it's literally there. You can see that it's there. You can follow the evidence that I have. If anybody wants to disagree about my suggestion that that this committee did actually influence the independence eventually to turn that article from peasants to heroes, I won't argue against you. I'm saying that I think that there is potential that the evidence that is there could lead to that being the consequence. But I'm not going to say it 100%. I just do find it very, very convenient that those things happened. And the fact that the Tories did also put on a, was it a slap order or something like that? But basically they did try to hide the fact that they had imported all of these Afghans. So, you know, I'll provide evidence where I can find it. Hopefully I don't go overboard in terms of this links to this, links to that, links to the other. Because I can't be arsed. I genuinely can't be arsed with it. I'm more interested in which offices do we have? What's the cost behind it? Do we need it? Should we get rid of it? Move on. Next. Do you then have your, effectively what ends up being like a manifesto thing to say, here's where you need to be able to look at that particular office, whether it provides value or not. Should we shut it down? Should there be any sort of consequences that we need to be taking into consideration? And then once we've dealt with all of those areas, move on. Create the government that we want, small g government, and then move on from there. Start looking at the solution side of it rather than being led by the nose. That's the intention, at least. How successful I am being at that is very much open to question. But never mind, it is what it is. So I think I've probably done a fair bit of waffling there, and that's so I'll leave it at that. And I'll see you next week. All right, cheers. Bye-bye.